former CEO. Be careful what I say. Mic's on.
Yeah.
Put a hand on here. At least you have a current picture. Sumit, mine's 10 years old.
Oh my gosh.
A lot fatter.
You can hear him pretty well, can't you?
Oh. Thought you couldn't. Okay.
Whispering into the microphone, does it really
Doesn't work? I was just saying Sumit looks great.
Okay. No, I'm good.
The light is
Are
bright.
you opening, or how does it work?
No, you guys can start. I don't know if Marcy's already.
Marcy's in the green room. I think
Okay.
they can.
Excellent. Please go ahead.
Are you bringing Marcy in?
Hello, can you all hear me?
All right, great. Well, I think we're ready to get started. Thank you for joining us for the panel. It's for small businesses and kind of in that theme, you have to be very flexible as a small business to grow and build yourself to an exit. This panel's proving to be flexible as well. We've obviously changed out the moderator. I'm Paul Click with the McLean Group. Happy to join y'all today. And Marcy ran into a few problems on the way in here. It is a little bit of a monsoon out there, and we've been able to move her into Zoom. So, Marcy, thanks for joining us. Happy to be joined here, and I guess I'll introduce you and ask you at the same time to give us a little bit of your background. But first here to my left, Sumit.
Hey, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Tide DC, for having us here today. So I'm Sumit Srivastava. I think the title now says former CEO, and Marcy and I probably can both relate to that, but of Array Information Technology. And I know part of what we want to do here is also give you sort of backdrop of where we're coming from in terms of our personal stories. So for me, I've been 30 years in the government contracting business, generally in federal with some state and local. And I sort of look at my career in thirds. The first third, I worked for my dad, who was an entrepreneur that started an 8A company, a company that ultimately became an 8A, grew to about $60 million. But then had natural turbulence that you have, this is back in the 90s, transitioned out, ultimately settled in at about $40 million. And then I, at that point, was running the company. So I had this incredible experience at that time, pre-GWACs, pre-IDIQs, pre-all of that, right? Of getting through an 8A curve, stabilizing and figuring out what our story was going to be, and then ultimately selling to what became Keen Federal Systems' first acquisition in the federal space, now NTT Data. That started basically the second third of my career, which was around a wholly owned subsidiary of a large commercial business, $1 billion business at the time, that had a $50-60 million federal wholly owned subsidiary that they were running. So, the analogy or the issue there that lines up with a lot of what people face is, at 50 million as a subsidiary, we were now competing against all these big companies and having to deal with how do you win large contracts and contracts that on the full and open side when you're still basically budgeting your BNP and having resources that are at a 40, 50, 60, $70 million level. But of course, we had the benefit of all the commercial business. And I think that was a lot of great training ground, a publicly traded firm where we could begin to see in the beginning of this millennium, the movement even in the government towards commercial technologies, commercial buying practices. You started seeing that happening. And so that was some fantastic learning and some great mentors there. And then for the last 10, 12 years, I joined a $15 to $17 million pure 8A, all sole source business to help navigate through the rest of that journey, ultimately to try to be a full and open competitive firm. And then just a month ago, we sold that business to CGI Federal. And so that's why it's former CEO and unemployed right now, but very happy. So
Unemployed and looking forward to taking a short break.
Hopefully a longer break. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff going on in this region, and I will get to that too. But in terms of some great opportunities around STEM and workforce development, regional economic development. It's such a vibrant area, and everybody knows that. And so really looking to hit some passion projects around that. But
Great.
yeah, thank you.
And sitting next to Sumit, and one of the sponsors of the event here, so thank you for that, Ashish with Bank of America.
Thank you, Paul. And Sumit, I wouldn't feel bad for him. He got a couple of job offers right outside when we were standing, so and he turned them all down. So, but first of all, thank you to Tide DC. This is an amazing 3 days. I think hats off to Sunday and Manish and the rest of the team. You guys put together an incredible program. I know it's often a thankless journey, but well done. So I just want to give you guys a round of applause. I manage the commercial banking division for Bank of America. Been in this market for the last 30 years, in this geography for 40 years. Basically, we serve businesses like yourself and A to Z banking services in terms of whether you need operating capital, growth capital, if you're looking at an M&A, and of course, a complete suite of treasury services. So, and it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces in the crowd. So those of you who are clients, thank you. And those of you who are not, hopefully we'll get to talk soon.
And then finally, Marcy, turning back to you as well. Obviously, former president of Pythoris and now the co-founder of Elevate. If you could give us a little bit of your introduction and background, please.
Sure. I also want to thank Tide DC for this amazing conference. And ironically, I have actually worked with Ashish in the past. He helped us get our first revolving working line of credit. So obviously there's resources out there that are necessary for success in the GovCon space. And to tell you quickly a little bit about myself, been in the GovCon spaces for about 20 years. My husband and I co-founded Pythoris Corporation, and that was mission forward analytics and the full life cycle IT, the fusion of them together for primarily national security spaces. And we primarily worked in full and open contracts. We worked in a lot of efforts that there was no small business set aside. So we had to learn to bring the best and the brightest with the most innovative solutions from day one. And so just last year, the Klain Group and Paul's team were incredible in helping us divest our company to a venture cap firm, and that went really well. I'm very excited about the team still moving forward. They're still growing. They're literally winning every contract right now, and so I'm always being told about that. They're like, well, sure, once you left, every last contract was being won. So kudos for them. And then to where Sumit was going, I have a background in aviation. My husband does as well. And that was kind of that itch we couldn't scratch at Pythoris. So there was no time to stop. I guess it's a good or bad thing. I'm not really sure yet. But we created Accelerate, and that is the DC region's first unmanned systems center of excellence. I am a certified FAA commercial drone pilot, and we are bringing together innovation in a way where everybody in the American industry regarding drones and unmanned systems can innovate together and propel that industry forward. So cutting edge technologies, it's really the Wild West. It's the beginning of this industry, so it's very exciting. And I originally thought it was going to be more commercial based when I started this with my husband last December, and we're already getting sucked back into the GovCon market, which I'm very happy with. So.
Great, thank you. So Sumit, maybe circle back to you first with a question. As you walk through with us in the introduction, you've been in the industry 30 plus years. You've had two small businesses that you would have to say have had highly successful exits. Can you discuss or share with us top 3 kind of important lessons learned from going through both of those build-ups and exits, and what you would want to pass on to others in the small business field as kind of a lessons learned aspect?
Absolutely, and it's funny, Marcy inadvertently set me up perfectly for this, because if you listen to her intro about what her company did, it was, what was it, Mission Forward Analytics? Is that what I heard you say? I mean, that's number one, is like when you're getting into a business, and I feel like too often what you run into is, businesses that say, I'm GovCon IT services or something like that. And I understand often why in the early stages you have to do that. But for me, I think it's so important for you to know what your passions are, what missions you want to support, and what you really want to get into, and especially in the early days, because it's hard to take seriously. If you're a big company or if you're trying to compete, it's hard to take seriously someone that says, I do X to Y, or A to Z. I should say A to Z. X to Y is probably okay. And so that would be number one, is I think making sure that there's a reason and a rationale and a passion behind what it is you want to do, your company to do as far as solving problems, right? And in our case at Array, when I joined the company, that was sort of the first thing we did, is we took that 15 to 17 that was on momentum to 25 to 30 and sort of really looked at it and said, what can we pull from here that we can get people to rally around? And it basically, because of some of our previous backgrounds of a couple of us that were joining at that time, we became, sort of optimizing defense logistics operations through the application layer. And there were things and reasons behind it, but it was really easy to tell people what you actually did with that, right? So I think that's number one, and that sort of carries the day. It can evolve over time, right? It's, as you continue to grow, as you continue to scale, you can add some things, but I think it's really important to know what that mission is and get a depth of capability that when you're going to primes, when you're going to clients, and there was, a second point there, which is in the IC community, you don't have the 8As and the socioeconomic programs and things of that nature that sort of give you some umbrella over time. So you have to learn how to compete right from day one to basically get the business, and that's so important, there. So I think that's number one. Number two for me is the people you put around yourself, right? And this isn't just internally. We all talk about hiring the best people and having people who are smarter than you in the room and then letting them fly, right? It's also about what you're doing today and what you do in terms of building the external advisory group. And we've got two people on the stage here that we also have used the McLean Group twice in two of our transactions. And a key part of that is making sure you're building those relationships, that these are not just transactions. So whether it's the retail banker that helps you with your first working capital line of credit and then helps to grow with you and helps to understand what you're actually about, that's so important, is building that cultural affinity, building relationships, and just don't think about it with your attorneys and lawyers, or attorneys and accountants, your bankers, your investment bankers. It's also the kind of companies and mentors that you work with. I've got a couple, I know there was one here the other day, after my dad, some of you know Deepak Hathirahmani, he's like the next person I look to and have looked to for 25 years when, as an alternate to my father, even though we're about the same age, but he started his entrepreneurial journey much earlier. He experienced things earlier, and he was always there to answer questions. And so building that kind of set of relationships in your external environment and doing it early. And I'll say that the other thing is plan for your success. I don't know how many people I've run into that are doing estate planning and wealth management work and all of that stuff at the tail end of the process. And so really make sure you've got your own personal stuff set up, because you don't fail fast in GovCon. So we're here at a GovCon conference, right? It's going to take time for you to even figure out whether you survive or not. And yet, all our goals is to survive. So I'd say just make sure that not only are there external advisors, but you're thinking about that broader spectrum of, when I succeed, have I set myself up right and have I set my family up right? Because for most entrepreneurs and small business owners, all your eggs are typically in this basket, and it's really important to prepare for that success. So.
Great, I think very helpful. A lot of similar suggestions we like to provide, with businesses as we begin working with them. So thank you for sharing that. Marcy, maybe switch back over to you. Obviously, Pathoros and the exit you've gone through, that was done after funding and growing and building that business over 10 plus years. Sticking with the lessons learned kind of concept, as you go through your transaction process, and while maybe not as recent as Sumeet, still pretty recent, and maybe a little bit longer to give you time to think through it. In hindsight of that, are there any things you wish you would have done differently or done earlier to prepare?
So yes, 100%. Three things come to mind, and I want to take some time to talk about the first one for a little bit here, because I think it's the most important, which is we had started entertaining, talking with different M&A firms, brokerage firms. Around 2018, we knew we wanted to sell in 2020, but it was just kind of, hey, we'd like to get to know you, and we didn't really get into the meat of anything until we really decided that we wanted to go with the McLean Group. And what I would have done and would have liked to do earlier is actually have taken the time to really understand what we need to do sooner. So it was about 2019, fall of 2019, when McLean Group said, hey, here's what you guys are doing really great. Here's what you could work on that will help get your multiplier higher, help get your valuation higher. If I had taken the time to do that sooner, think of all those contracts that I could have focused on and pinpointed in the right strategic way. So maybe my valuation would have even been higher. So I would recommend to anybody that's thinking about an exit, start talking with an M&A firm. McLean Group was amazing for us, and it really helped us to strategize where we needed to go. So when we touched base about a year later, we were more pinpointed on where we wanted to go for our valuation. The other piece of that is, don't be afraid to ask questions when you're starting to talk with these brokerage firms. Everybody in this industry knows, oh, well, there's a multiplier. But what does that mean? Most people don't know. I've talked with, I don't know, at least 50 different executives over the past year since we've sold. And they all say, well, what's that multiplier? Is it 1 times revenue? What is it? And nobody really knows, and I'm not an expert in it, and every company is different. Every company has different value. Every company has a different goodwill factor. And so it's important to be able to talk with a brokerage firm and really understand what it is that end buyers really want to see. That's one of the biggest pieces that I think I would have done in hindsight earlier. And everybody always says this, but no one does it. Think about that exit strategy earlier too. If you want to stay in the company, what does that look like for you? Do you want to stay in full-time? Do you want to stay in part-time? Do you want to stay in half-time? Whatever it is, I knew that I wanted to do maybe 25% with Thoris so I could focus on Accelerate. And that meant that I needed to make sure that I had some leadership that could take over a lot of my responsibilities for ConOps for the procuring company. So these are things that really should be proactively thought about as you're going through this process. Another piece that I would have liked to think about earlier is asking for a list of documents that need to be compiled as part of your entire process, including your contract pipeline, the waterfall chart, even as simple as getting your EIN information together. All that back-end due diligence paperwork that the procuring companies are going to want to see. If you can get that information earlier on what you need to put together, then you can dilute the time that you're spending, and it won't be a huge chunk of time that you need to take away from a proposal that you're bidding or just your general operations or anything you're trying to do strategically. And then this is just something that happened during COVID for us. The last thing I would probably say is it would have been nice for us to have really been able to have our staff meet our procuring companies team in person sooner. Naturally, that just couldn't happen because of COVID, but I really feel like getting to have that in-person connection also helps to solidify and really help you to understand this was, yes, absolutely the right choice for my company and for all of my team moving forward to be successful.
So what I'm hearing is think through the process, plan through the process, get started earlier than you would think, allow yourself the time for the education and ask questions to really be prepared to attack the process.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Great, thank you. Ashish, you bring a completely different perspective to the table, in your work with Bank of America. You've had the opportunity to work with hundreds of contractors, many of which are going to have pursued exits outside of M&A. Can you talk through other exit, other liquidity options available in the government contracting space, and kind of how you can help with those opportunities?
Sure, absolutely. And I think just to piggyback on what Marcy said, plan early, that's key. And also what Sumit said, you got to have a key set of advisors. And the key set of advisors needs to be not a bunch of yes ma'am, right? They need to give you critical, honest feedback, right? Because if you're just simply surrounding yourselves with people who are just going to agree with you and not give you that critical feedback, it's a disservice to you. Directly to your point, Paul, everyone would want to exit at some point. They're like thinking 10x, 20x, Sumit's case 100x, whatever it may be. But take a step back and really think about it. Every company is not saleable. Are you a saleable company? Are you ready for an exit? Do you even want to exit? What if you don't want to exit? A common option available to every privately held company is a dividend recapitalization, right? This is where private equity is not coming in. You still maintain ownership of the company. Your balance sheet makeup changes, but your net worth doesn't change, right? You're taking a few chips off of the table. So if you have a company that has a proven cash flow, something that's sustainable, and you can show a backlog, a contract backlog, so the lender gets comfortable with the future income stream, it's a great opportunity to take some chips off of the table as you work towards perhaps that exit or becoming saleable, right? So think about it in simple terms, just to use small numbers. Perhaps you're thinking about exiting and you think your company is going to be valued at $50 million. Rather than waiting 2 or 3 years, you may be able to do a dividend recap today for $10 million and do what you want with that company. So reward yourself and take some of the risk off of the table, right? So there's a lot of other options, and thank you to Sumit. He kind of did our infomercial earlier. Before you do anything, you want to make sure you consult with the wealth manager, right? Your banker can help you, introduce you to somebody. Make sure you're talking to tax advisors, because once you sign that letter of intent, trust me, you can't make any changes. The IRS is watching you, right? So at least 12 months prior to making any changes in the company's tax structure, make sure you're connecting with a wealth advisor and really sit down and talk through your plan on what you want it to look like in the future.
Yeah, and certainly from the tax issue, that's something that really benefits a company to do as early as possible. Yep. It helps you lay out the right structure for the business, and then helps you make the decisions from an early standpoint on where you're going, where you want to go, and how to get there.
Could I comment on something?
Please.
Because I want to pull a thread there. For the Array story, it's actually very interesting because it follows a little bit of what Ashish was saying. We're second generation owners, the three of us that became management owners back in 18. So you had a founder who actually started the company in 97. And I came in late 2008, early 2009 to sort of deal with that growth strategy and the transition strategy. So we got around to 2016, 2017. We had a great group of advisors. So to some of the point, Marcy, you even made it, we were already producing documents and managing the business in a way that could just basically fill a data room when the time came. And so around 2016, 17, Brian, who's the founder, came to us and said, hey, it's been 20 years. I'd like to be able to cash out. I like to take some chips off the table. And we actually went down a path because we had very clear line of sight on cash flow and backlog, and we were keeping really good records of looking at an ESOP transaction actually at that time, where we could let him and the other majority owners take their money off the table to a great extent, but then let us as the management team who were executing a certain strategy around this whole defense logistics app services play to keep going. And in the process, we basically came to a decision point, and this was the first time we had engaged the McLean Group to help us run that process, where if you think back to 16, 17, that was really the early, or 17, early 18, the early days of what you now see with PEs in what I'll call the small business incubation model, where they're coming in, they're taking a reasonably sized small business that may still have to transition, but they've got a good management team, they've got that line of sight, and they can start adding scale to them and hopefully taking them to another level. And you see that a lot currently. So we found ourselves in that or this leverage situation, because that's what ESOP basically does, is leverage you up, but your cash flows can then start to cover that. And we ended up with something in the middle. We basically said, you know what, rather than going down that, because an ESOP comes with all sorts of other, it's an ERISA type program, right? So you got all sorts of regulations and trustees and all this other stuff. We actually, the three management side said, what if we use the same ESOP structure? And because we had all of that infrastructure and sort of, the ability to, and what if we effectively did an ESOP-like deal, but did it ourselves? So we had a senior lender that was able to, put some stuff in, skin in the game. We had a mezzanine play. Then we had a shareholder note coming from those majority owners, and you effectively structured it that way. That allowed us in 2018 to actually take majority control of the company, and then drive this strategy. And then we thought that would run longer. The market's in a pretty good place right now, and the opportunities came to us, and so we were able to actually do the full exit, and then connecting with something Marcy said too, knowing that there were passion projects for a couple of us in our future, and we'd started to work on those anyway around the region. We also knew that we had to build a management team to get ready. So just kind of wanted to pull that thread it really is. Alternative forms of financing are a great way as an interim strategy. They're a great way if you're a founder owner that is looking to take chips off the table, and also a great way to begin to have your leadership team start to participate in all that success.
Great, thank you.
If I could just jump in for 1 second as well. I fully agree with everything Sumit and Ashish are saying. And getting the opportunity to talk with wealth management, getting the opportunity to meet with a M&A firm early on, they can also provide guidance on the right way forward too. It's not always just selling to some company, whether it's strategic, whether it's a capital firm or whoever it is. It could be the ESOP. It could be everything that we're discussing today. So I guess it's just a little shameless plug again for McLean Group and others out there that they can help guide. That's what they're here for, to provide that right direction forward.
And Paul, just two quick points, because he mentioned one, data center in case, or data room, if those of you are not familiar with it. So when dealing with a bank or investment bank, they will have something called a data room or a data center. They'll sign a confidentiality agreement with you. So all the information that's flowing through, it's on a needs-to-know basis only. And preparing early, you'll be surprised how often deals fall through simply because you've been so good at running your business, but you don't have the data, right? It's, the balance sheet is called a balance sheet for a reason. It needs to balance. You'll be surprised where we see companies doing great, making a lot of money, but they send in financials, the balance sheet doesn't balance. It's incredible. So really doing your homework ahead of time, I think what like Marcy mentioned and Sumit mentioned, they had enough information to fill a data room. So your lender is looking for that financial expertise from your side, right? That sophistication, I should say. That are you able to turn this information? Keep in mind, you're a privately held company. You're not publicly traded. So your financials, it needs to be, there might be a quality of earnings report that's required down the road. So making sure financials are of good quality, I think, is critical. And he mentioned ESOP. So the biggest difference between the dividend recap and ESOP, with the dividend recap, your ownership structure is not changing. Okay, you're maintaining ownership still in the company. ESOP is going to change that ownership structure. And last point, keep one thing in mind, I think you also mentioned, it's skin in the game. Banks are senior debt providers. We're not your equity partner, right? Equity partner is going to come in, whether it's a private equity firm or venture capital. Now you're giving up ownership and equity in the company. So we're going to be a bit stringent, right? It's not going to be a carte blanche, like here's 30, 40 million, do what you like, right? At the end of the day, it's your money that we're lending, right? You have money in the bank with us. We have a fiduciary responsibility to do the due diligence. So keep that in mind when you're going to a lender, wherever you bank. They are a senior debt provider, right? They want to facilitate the growth. They want to facilitate your future, but keep it in perspective that they're not equity partners.
So kind of staying with this flow of where we are. We're a small business. We've built ourselves up. We've done a great job of learning and growing and building up. We've hired the McLean Group. They've started advising us. We're asking our questions. We're getting educated. We've brought in tax advisors. We've brought in the accountant team. We've brought in wealth advisors. We have a great relationship with our commercial banker, Bank of America. We're ready for an exit.
Don't forget the private bank from Bank of America also. Wealth advisors. Commercial.
Well, I brought in the wealth advisors.
I thought you already got your plug in.
I see my colleague sitting there. I wanted to make sure we get a plug in for him. So
now we're ready. We're ready for that liquidity event. and that liquidity event, we're going to angle it in the M&A marketplace. We're going to look for somebody to acquire our business. Valuation is important. That's part of what we've been driving towards from day one and building this up. And I'll put this out to all three of you at the same time. In an exit, in deals you've been a part of, Ashish, and deals you've seen, in your experience, what are some other deal characteristics that are really important for us when we're evaluating the potential suitors?
I can take a first cut at that from our experience recently. Although we had retained the McLean Group and we'd been getting advice from an amazing set of external advisors, we did have a decision point about whether we ran an auction process and put it out there or targeted folks. And so to your point or to your question, we actually used basically non-financial factors because honestly, I think our market's very mature, and if you've got the right financial advisors, external advisors across the board, the right M&A attorneys and the the investment banks and the retail banks. But if you're surrounding yourself with the right people, it's not this wide, right? I mean, your valuations are within a pretty solid range, and it's pretty well understood, and the market's pretty knowledgeable about that. So we really looked at what was the best fit culturally, and we also looked at the fact that because we were a pure breed defense, app services, logistics, systems firm, that there were certain places that we just knew that our people, especially because we knew that the management owners were looking to step away and go to their passion projects, of a place where they could really thrive. And Marcy actually referred to how her team keeps winning business. So kind of playing off of that in our case, we weren't looking for another major defense player. We were looking for someone that would value what we had, that it was a good cultural fit, and that when we slotted in this much bigger $10 billion firm, that defense competency and the competencies that we had were actually going to allow our people to get into leadership positions, which is effectively how it's translated. So breaking that or pulling it down to just kind of a summary, for us it was about culture and it was about the business fit, and we knew the financial component of it would take care of itself within a certain range.
Marcy, maybe lean towards you on the same question, having gone through it with Pythorio. So are there other points you see out there as maybe not equally as important as valuation, but very important characteristics to be attuned to?
Yeah, so I think Sumit really hit on one that was the forefront of the non-financial factors for us, which was culture. You have to make sure long-term that your people are going to be gainfully employed, they're going to feel good about what they're doing, and that really mattered to us. When we found our fit, I think even the McLean Group said that they really haven't seen another company that fit so well with us. It was like our first meeting, we already intermeshed and you couldn't tell which company was which when we were talking. That really mattered. Second to that was opportunities for people. I wanted to be able to go to my team and we called every one of them personally and we said, hey, here's what's happening. We just sold and this is the company, but you're going to have better opportunities. You're going to have a great culture. You're going to even have better benefits. And I honestly thought there was going to be a lot of backlash. And I was very surprised. Every last person said, Marcy, Andy, you've taken care of us for 13 years. We trust your decision. So that really speaks to finding what that right culture is in a company that has the opportunities for growth and leadership. It's very similar to what Sumit was saying, but obviously focusing on the fact that you have to have value that will make actually a company excited for you instead of just being another bottom line add to the portfolio.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I think that's even more important when you think through what I like to counsel my clients a lot is valuation is important, and that's really what we're running after, how to best maximize value. But at times you can't reach that maximum value if your structure is not set up the right way, the structure of the transaction. And that's earnouts, and that's deferred payments and other components. If the culture doesn't fit, you're not going to have the ability to get to those earnout payments. If you want to work for 25% of the time or 50% of the time and that doesn't fit into the structure, then it's even harder to help maximize that value. So, Ashish, I think you also bring a little bit of a different perspective. Do you see other points where you would counsel people on best ways to look at the characteristics of a transaction aside from valuation?
Yeah, I think the valuation simply is a starting point, right? It's the baseline. And Marcy made a great point, culture, right? That's critical. When we're looking at beyond the numbers, we're looking at culture and we're looking at management. But really, at the end of the day, we want to look at, are your goals strategically aligned, right? You think of it as a marriage, and where are you trying to end up? And what was the purpose of this transaction? Was it simply an exit for someone, and that's all they care about? Or is it something, there's a larger picture in mind, right? You could have a transaction happening simply, from a basis of economies of scale. You may have a $50 million company saying, if I continue on an organic basis, I might get to 60, 70 in a couple of years. Now, if I acquire a $25 million company, right away I'm at 75 million. So really thinking through on what the objective was of that transaction, and how do the two companies that are merging, we'll just call it a merger, how do they contribute towards that end ultimate goal, right? Of course, valuation, when we start with those numbers, then as you know, there's discounts or there's multipliers on top of it. And those are based on these intangibles, culture, management, and what is your strategic end goal.
Yeah. If I could add to that, actually, because something you said just triggers, and I don't know with the IC community, because I'm not as experienced in that space, but I know for a lot of folks that are in sort of the traditional IT services space, which is a lot, in federal or civilian or defense, vehicles is such a huge issue, right? I mean, mentioned earlier, GWACS only kind of came out of the ground in 97, 98 timeframe, and now it's whatever, 80% of the buying of IT is happening through that. And so one of the business issues that really was a driver for us too is, and it's something everybody faces, is, it's, I won't say it's easy, but when you win major GWACS or best-in-class vehicles or agency IDIQs, that as a small business, and you do incredibly well, obviously, with the 2007 recertification rule, you also have this sort of, this pushing out of this program and all those other things that happen. But we're finding with the way the government is procuring those vehicles now, there's, these point systems, they're scale-based typically. They typically, force you. So you can be $100, $150 million, even, I know for many of you, CISP4, if you tried to get on or think that you want to be at the table when they ultimately award the full and open side, there were $100 million companies trying to do CTAs and JVs or whatever because they didn't think they could get on. And so that was actually one of the trigger events for us. Was we knew we had a great product, we knew we had great clients, we knew we were doing really good work. And as we transitioned from the 90% small business to 90% full and open, but that still didn't mean we were going to be able to get on those vehicles. Alliant is recompeted multiple years from now. CISP just went in. So we were really looking from a business landscape perspective that one of the things we needed to find was that partner that not only valued our business, but had the vehicles that allow us to also go to our clients and say, this is why this is good for you. And that was part of the messaging, is that, hey, you're being forced into best in class. You're being forced into these other vehicles. We're not going to be there for you. We're going to turn out to be a sub. And instead of like slogging through that for the next couple of years, I think the other lesson learned is knowing when is the right time. And entrepreneurial spirit might drive you to say, I'll get there. But I think it's also important to understand that combination actually, allowed our clients to now succeed too, because we had the collaboration, we had these longstanding clients, and now they had vehicles that they could get to us from. And so, making sure that business dynamic and like I said, something you triggered off that really plays out, and then knowing when is the right time, right? And not slogging through for the next couple of years, because there's pain in that. There's a lot of risk in that. We, certainly in the next couple of years, we don't know how we're going to pay the piper on some of the Recovery Act stuff and all the, money that's coming through from all the COVID money. There's going to be a cliff there. And so that's how we were looking at the world. And of course, tax policy, you can't avoid that. And said, this is the right time. But it was the right time, I think, for the business too, regardless of those other issues. So.
Great.
Yeah, if I could just jump in from the IC perspective for a moment, because Sumit obviously was talking more from the other side. As a small business, full and open is a lot of times how contracts are given in the IC spaces. And so if you, as a small business, have the opportunity and are strategically aligned with some really great large integrators that will back you on these full and open projects, these IDIQs, these GWACs, that is an avenue for success long-term. You can then use some of their support to help you build your proposal, but also obviously that will increase your valuation long-term as well. Naturally, don't go over after anything. You got to ruthlessly qualify, of course, but if there's an area in a GWAC or an IDIQ that is coming out that is in your sweet spot, that is something that you should think about.
So we have about 10 minutes left. We have a panel with two very successful executives and
Ashish.
One retired.
and a very well-connected commercial banker. I think we've covered a lot in terms of the small business opportunity, growth, and exit opportunities. But I wanted to give an option to the audience on any questions they may have, open to any of us or any topic. Are there any?
Hey, come on, Mr. President, you got to wait for the mic.
All right. The question I had was, what are the top 3 reasons you've seen transactions not go through from your vantage point?
I'll let Paul go first. Executive answer.
Top 3. I think if you pull on a little bit on points Marcy was saying in her original answer in terms of being prepared, a lot of times we will start working with companies. They're pushing the timeline for different reasons. It could be personal issues. It could be calendar issues. A lot of that has happened this year. They haven't spent the time to be prepared. They haven't spent the time to ask the questions. I've done a lot of deals in the software marketplace, through the government aspect, and it's easy for a software executive to look at multiples in the marketplace and say, well, I should trade at 12 times revenue. That's not necessarily feasible across the board. There's a lot of things that have to go into place to reach multiples like that. So if you're educated ahead of time, if you're asking the questions, if you're looking at how that valuation aspect, which we've talked about, is done, then you can help mitigate that. If you jump into a transaction and you learn it on the fly, then you start uncovering those issues. I think the tax issue is also a big reason that things will fall apart. When you're a government contractor, you have to deal with potential novation issues, so you're forced into selling typically in a very straight format in terms of an equity transaction. And that can create different tax issues for the owners if you're not structured the right way. So that's kind of somewhere between 2 and 4, maybe not top 3, but kind of a good sense of where you will see pitfalls and issues and why things may happen.
Yeah. I think, believe it or not, you've all heard of buyer's remorse. I think there's also seller's remorse. So we had a transaction that fell through just last month where at the 11th hour, the individual wanted to pull out because greed played a role in it. All of a sudden he's like, well, why did I settle for 40 million? Maybe I could have gotten 60 million, right? So that does play a part. Of course, now they're in a legal battle with each other, so that will continue. And I think Paul mentioned this earlier, you have to be prepared. Oftentimes during due diligence, you will uncover things that hopefully the seller should have been forthright about, you would hope, right? If you're, you talked about character earlier, but there's sometimes you'll be surprised at things that 3 months into the due diligence phase, all of a sudden you peel the onions and you find out, oh, oops, this is not what they told me it was. So I think I would leave it at those two reasons.
I need to ask Paul this question, but I guess I need to be a customer for him right now. So Sumit, this is for you. Between auction buyers or the targeted buyer, at what point have you decided? Is it something part of the planning you thought you had something in mind, or it's one of those things as you get closer you thought maybe I should switch gears? And
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And for us, it started with the 2017 process. When we kind of went to market there, it actually gave us a great chance to talk to some of the PEs in the space. We knew as a predominant small business content at the time that the option wasn't going to be strategic, right? So, but it gave us an opportunity to talk to folks. The other thing was because we had a pretty precise business space, right? In the kind of work we did and the partners we work with, there were a lot, and Marcy kind of mentioned this, a lot of strategics that we were working with that started to get to know us. And so I'd say starting in 19, we began to really have an acceleration of sort of the inbound calls, right? And they were coming from strategic and calls in the sense that, someone would say, hey, whenever you're ready, right, call us first, right? Yeah, everybody wants to be called first. And we were hearing that from some of the PEs and some of the platforms that were out there. So we felt pretty confident that with the advisory team we'd already had put together and continued to talk to frequently, and I'd throw that out there, even if they're not on retainer, every one of them is willing to talk to you, right? I mean, reach out to them, sit down with them, use the process to get to understand how things operate. And so we did a lot of that through 19 and even through COVID of keeping in touch with the marketplace, we actually thought 23-ish, which would have been 5 years from 18, would have been sort of when that senior debt, the amortizing note was going to kind of fall off and other things. We really thought that was our target. But in the process of these conversations, it became clear that there was a small group of people that we had cultural affinity with. We knew now each other well enough that we could slot in. And with the advisors, we sort of had an idea of what range of valuation we ought to be seeing. And it just, blessed kind of worked out to a T. We started in the spring and called that very small group, and it was a combo of some platforms and some strategics. Frankly, I mean, many who've been in the industry a long time know of the AMS pedigree and the Stanley pedigree, and so the CGI piece for us was absolutely something that was like, we know these people, we've known them for many years, they stay around. Most of that group of people is now leaders at CGI or CGI Federal, and so it just sort of worked. And we thought at that point that we could go through an auction, but we figured at the end, we knew what people might value us for, and by doing it this way, we might really be able to create the right combo. And so we never even looked at an auction process.
But by doing that, you had some trade-off then. You want to put your employees in the new home where you like. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
In a small businesses world, what's the valuation you're looking for? Generally, if you want to acquire a small business 8A company, what kind of a multiples of EBITDA we're talking about?
That's to you.
That's to you, Paul.
It's a trick question, and the trick answer is I need so much more details behind that to understand where's the business focused, where's the base
Federal.
of. Do we have customer concentration? How big is the revenue? What are the margins?
10 mil and talking about
Okay. Hallway, that's a hallway conversation.
I'm going to have to send you an engagement letter to answer more.
another quick question. I'm sorry. So, for acquisition finance, is the 7A is the best route or the commercial banking?
I missed the first part. You said
For the acquisition finance, basically.
Right.
Is the SBA 7A loans are the better or commercial banking is best? What you suggest?
both depends on the transaction itself, either or. It really depends. Like he mentioned, there's so much that goes into it. You really have to see what's the best scenario, but both could work out.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question if there's any more out there.
Okay.
So I have a question about the phrase you use about passion projects for the leaders of the company after it, is acquired. So how is that normally structured? Because you have engagement between those people, from those original people, to keep driving the company forward. But I guess in your case, you had the 25% engagement going forward. Obviously they can't conflict in what they do, but at the same time, how does that normally structured and look for it to be successful for all parties?
So in my situation, I wasn't aware that this was possible, but our M&A attorney said, hey, Marcy, you can carve out something for yourselves. And that was shocking to me. I've never heard that before, but he says, our attorney said, it's very rare that there are executives that they actually know exactly what they want to do in the afterlife, so to speak. So in that type of scenario, again, I'm not an attorney, but this is what he told us. He said, since you want to work with unmanned systems with drones, it's not competing in any way, shape, or form with our previous business, we carved it out into our purchase agreement. And so we made it very clear from the beginning. We said, hey, we still want to work with you all. We are very passionate about the force, but we have other interests we want to pursue. And these are some of what those are. And that way, it was no shock to them when they saw in the purchase agreement that we wanted to carve out an area for everything related to unmanned systems, which is why I'm here today with Accelerate, being able to move forward and operate with everything related to unmanned systems. So a carve out is essentially what it is.
Yeah, and in my case, when I referred to that, it was a little bit more around last couple of years, starting to get more involved in some not-for-profit initiatives around the region, around STEM education, hitting underserved communities, things like that. So my reference to passion projects was more that I was getting to a point in my career as a majority owner that it was time to go focus on other things. And so in our case, we started building the business and bringing in the management team that we knew could carry the ball forward for us. And so part of that parting, conversation with the employees was like, we've done the job to get here. We've brought in the people that we know can take it to another level. We've partnered them with the right company that's going to help them do that. And it was easy. So I was there 2 days, right? The closing day, the next day for town hall and public announcement, and then moved on to, it's been 3 weeks, but started to take the stuff I'd already been doing and began to drive it into more. So it was a different scenario where it wasn't going to be conflicting with the mission and the GovCon and that area.
So I think we've pushed our time a little bit. I wanted to thank Sumit, Ashish, Marcy, the panelists here, and the great questions from the audience. Ty DC, thank you for having us. It's been enjoyable, and I'm happy to not answer more questions in the hallway.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And while Sundi is giving appreciation tokens of appreciation to them, I do want to do a small plug for Sumit. Sumit, from the entire GovCon committee here and probably the entire board, thank you so much for what you've done for Ty in the past 1 year. I mean, you've been incredible. I mean, he has a flight to catch in probably next 30 minutes, or I don't know, and he's running. He still wanted to stay back and do this for us. So thank you so much.
He's flying to his island, Dubai.
He's going to his private island.
Halloween with the nephew.